I went out and looked, and yes, 16 has been released. It hadn't propagated over to the other website yet. I don't know how long that takes. But if you just go to downloads, asterisk.org, you can download it from there. The email has not gone out yet either, and that's due to the network back in Huntsville. Actually, the internet went down for some reason, and they've been having problems all day. So it's good timing. So this next section is Introduction to Dialplan. So the goals for this one is to kind of understand what the Dialplan is and the syntax of the Dialplan, the different sections, the context extensions and priorities that are used. We'll kind of walk through the end priority and what it means and how you use it. Also look at priority labels and the same designator. And we'll go ahead and build out just some basic extensions and test them here with these phones I have up here. So what is Dialplan? The Asterisk Dialplan is not like a traditional Dialplan in the old traditional PBXs where you have just kind of like a line that mapped to this actual extension. It's more like a scripting language, if you would. You can actually do some jumps and evaluations and make decisions based on the value of certain variables. This is pretty much what makes Asterisk powerful and flexible. And it is pretty much the heart of the Asterisk system. It defines what happens when you place a call. So some of the essential concepts of the Dialplan are context, extensions, priorities, applications, labels, and comments, and we'll walk through each of these and describe what each of these are. So a context is essentially a container of extensions. In this example down here, we have two different contexts, which are in the square brackets. We have demo and default, and you'll note that there's a 500 in each of those. Those are actually different extensions because they're in their own context. So you can have the same extension in different contexts and they can do different things. And we'll see a sample of that shortly. Comments are a semicolon, just like any of the other config files in Asterisk. Note here that if you comment out a context, then all the extensions that were down below that context definition will actually belong to the context up above. So this would be a bad way of commenting out an entire context because you're not really doing that. You might have unwanted circumstances because of this. The better way to comment out an entire context would be to actually comment out every extension within the context or do the block context style, the semicolon dash dash. So the extension syntax. Extensions are pretty much anything you can type. Most of the time they're going to be numbers because that's what we can dial with the regular telephone. But an extension can be a name. It can be combination name and numbers, whatever you want. And in fact, with some soft phones, it allows you to even dial alphanumeric numbers. So in this example, we have the syntax is the extension name, then the priority, which is the steps for that extension, and then the application to run for that priority. In this example, we have extension 1000, priority number 1, which means the first step of that extension. And we're going to dial a PJSIP endpoint called Digium phone. Likewise, underneath it, extension Tom does the exact same thing. And we have a extension 1234, priority 1, that all it does is a no-op, which essentially is what it is does nothing, but it will print out hello world in the command line interface. So the priority is essentially a tag that tells each step in the extension when to execute. So you can have multiple priorities per extension, and each priority will run a different application. Any questions? Make sense? Kind of like line numbers in the old basic programming language, if anybody's that old school. The application is what to perform on the channel that's dialed that extension. And each, like I said earlier, each priority will have its own application. Let's go look at the applications, the Dialplan applications. Get over there. So that's the list of all of the Dialplan applications that I currently have loaded via the modules. You can see like stop music on hold, stop mix monitor, which just will stop recording the call. You can do some send DTMF, receive fax, lots of applications, 173 to be exact. So here's an example of multi-line extensions, multi-priority extensions, if you would. We have extension 600. The first step would be to play back hello world. The second would be to play back goodbye. And then the third priority is to hang up. And it would do that in that order. Within the Dialplan, you can also use the same designator, which essentially says the same extension as above. So these two would be identical. So the same in this case means extend 6,000. And then we also have the N priority, which says next priority. So this would be evaluated to priority 2, and this would be evaluated to priority 3. So you don't have to actually enter the numbers. So you have to enter the first one. Then you can use ends from then on, and it'll do it in the order that they're written within the Dialplan. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, we have an application called a goto. Here's an example of why you would want to do that. So for extension 6,000 right there, it's going to play back hello world. Priority 2 is going to play back goodbye. Then priority 3 is going to go to priority 2. So it'll just jump back to priority 2 and play goodbye forever and ever until they hang up the phone. You can also go to a label. So in this case, we're going to say go to start loop rather than go to 2. And why would we want to do that? Use a label to redirect to. Maybe you'd want to add a priority in between the two, and then or up above the start loop one. In that case, it would be priority 3 and not priority 2 anymore. So if you use labels, it always goes to the right place. That make sense? Yes?
In case you use the line numbers instead of the end?
I don't. It was really nice when they came out with the end. Back in the 1.2, 1.4 days, I don't think it was there. We had to go renumber everything. If we added a new priority in between somewhere and there were some go-tos, then we would have to renumber everything. Just like the old basic days. So what else can goto do? We saw where it can go to a priority. You can also go to an extension and a priority. So in this case, go to 6,000 priority 1, which would jump back up to there. So if we dialed 7,000, it would jump up, play back hello world, and then hang up the call. It can also go to a context extension and priority. So if we dialed 6,000 in context B, it would actually jump up to context A extension 7,000, which in turn would jump up to extension 6,000 in context A and play back hello world. Everybody okay with that? So there's 3 forms. You can have just a priority, a extension priority, and then context extension and priority. And I had some animation here. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to the Dialplan. Any questions on the context extension priorities or the end priority or the same designator? Are we okay there?
Real quick question.
Yes.
Can you go back to the last example? So on the last one, context A 7,000. So I guess my first one is it doesn't care that in the example above, you're doing the what is it, the step, the 7,000, and in other programming languages, you're changing around the order of the parameters. It figures out that it's a context automatically and just...
It always takes this form. So it's always context extension priority.
But the example in the middle, isn't it the...
Extension and priority.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, normally I put them on the other end.
Yeah, that is just Dialplan syntax, yes.
Gotcha. And then the last parameter on it, can you use the label instead of the step?
You could, yes.
I'm good. Thanks.
All right. So maybe we're caught up now. So this module's titled Configuring Endpoints. So what do we need when we're configuring a SIP device? We need to know what the interface and transport protocol to use, UDP, TCP, TLS, whatever. We need to know the phone's credentials, username and login. This is what Asterisk needs to know. Asterisk needs to know where the phone is located to send it calls, what's its IP address. Asterisk needs to know what to do with phone calls coming in from that phone, what context to throw the calls into. And to configure that in Asterisk, we do that with either sip.conf or pjsip.conf. We're not going to even look at sip.conf because you shouldn't be using that anymore. So we're going to do everything pjsip. So what does the phone need to know? It needs to know the location of the Asterisk server, its IP address. It needs to know the same credentials that were configured in Asterisk. And that is done with the phone's own interface or some sort of provisioning server. Most phones have a web-based configuration tool that you can use to configure the phones. All phones, I believe, have a way to actually provision it using some sort of option 66 or something like that to go grab its configuration file. So the bare minimum that Asterisk needs to know is the transport, location of the phone, credentials of the phone, how to route calls from the phone, and we're going to do that by using Asterisk Dialplan. You tell the server which context to look in for the extension that was dialed. We've kind of already gone through this a little bit, but ChanSIP, I had the number wrong. It is 35,000 lines of code, which is huge for a C source code file. Again, it was marked as extended support in Asterisk 13, and which pretty much means unless it's a security issue, Digium's not going to look at it. You're free to make changes all you want, and you can submit those changes to Digium, and they'll maybe accept it, but Digium's not going to spend any more time developing new features for ChanSIP. They're only doing that for PJSIP, which was introduced in Asterisk 12. Again, it is a third-party open source SIP stack. Let's do that one line right here. I like tab completion. If we do show like PJSIP, you can see there's actually 48 modules for PJSIP. And each of the modules do a very specific thing. So it's broken down, it's much more modular than one monolithic file like the old SIP stack was. And it's pretty mature. The first release of PJSIP was in 2005. And chances are the phone on your desk, if it's a SIP phone, it's probably using PJSIP stack as well. So how do we configure an endpoint in PJSIP? Well, the first thing we needed was the transport. So we have a transport up at the top. We're saying transport, use protocol UDP and bind it to 0000, in other words, listen on every interface for it. Note the type of this little section is transport. There are different types of sections within the PJSIP file, which makes it a little different than other configuration files within Asterisk. So we have a endpoint. It's going to be named 6001. Again, it's a type endpoint. The context that we're going to throw calls into that come in from this phone will be local phones. We tell it which codecs we allow this phone to speak and which transport we're using. That actually references this transport up at the top. Then we have two other references that we have for endpoints. The auth, which references this auth down below here, and then AORs, which is address of record. Where is this phone? What's the IP address of this phone? And we'll note down here in 6001, the AOR record, there is no address there. We do have something called max contacts, which pretty much says that this phone is going to register to Asterisk and tell us its IP address. So that's how you handle registrations with endpoints in PJSIP. Are we okay with that? It's very different from the old ChanSIP if you use that. There was just one section for each endpoint. They've broken it out, and there's a minimum of 4 for phones. The transport can be placed anywhere in the PJSIP file. You can have multiple different types of transports. You can have one for TCP and one for UDP. And if you did that, you could tell one phone to use UDP and one to use TCP or TLS or whatever transport you want to use. Here's a sample of the one I'm actually using, kind of what I'm actually using for the phones here. Note down at the bottom, you can have max contacts, which says this phone's going to register to me, or you can explicitly tell it what the IP address is of that phone, which is probably not safe in a DHCP environment, but if it's always going to be that IP address, there's no reason you couldn't do that.
Can you FTDN?
I bet you could. I have never tried it. I don't see why not. I mean, I'm sure it'll use the resolver built into Asterisk. So, again, this is where in the question.
What I ran into is that actually the last one that registers wins. So it's just a battle between the devices. Yeah, we said ours. We did 10 in the beginning, but they fixed it because it used to be they wouldn't time out, and if you had a mobile device going off and on, off and on,
Yeah.
you would lose it. But as of about the past 2 months, I don't have that anymore. We've been dropping the numbers.
Interesting. I'll ask them what they did. But I've run into that same problem, yeah. Again, this is where do we start? We're going to start in context phones. Which codecs to allow? Note here that there's not an allow all like the old ChanSIP. The credentials, again, are in the auth section. The network location is at the AOR record. Again, max contacts to register or contact equal for a static IP address. And how do we dial a PJ-SIP endpoint? Pretty much like the old SIP endpoint. We use the dial command and then PJ-SIP / and then the 7001, which is the endpoint that we defined. So the PJ-SIP call flow, in this case, we have Doug's phone up here, which is endpoint 205. Doug dials 200. So we look at the endpoint record for 205, and it is in context inside. So we'll go over to the Dialplan in the extensions.conf and find the inside context, and we look for 200, extension 200 inside this context, which is right there. The application for this, for 200, priority 1 says dial PJ-SIP 200. So we'll go back over to the pjsip.conf and find endpoint 200 and try to dial it, which is Jane's phone. Jane's phone rings. And we know it's Jane's phone because Jane's phone actually registered to Asterisk and told it its IP address. So we know how to get to it. We okay with that? Questions? Okay. So how do we configure the endpoint to match? We can do it manually. With the Digium phones, you can actually type in the IP address of the server and all of that with the keyboard, or you can use the web GUI. You can use option 66, which most of the time will tell the phone where to go pick up its configuration file, which is usually an XML file, and it'll pick it up based on the MAC address of the phone usually. Or you could use something called DPMA, which is a Digium thing. It's a Digium phone module for Asterisk. And it allows Asterisk itself to hold the configuration for the phone, and then when the phone boots up, you can tell it which Asterisk server to go pull its configuration from. And it'll pull it. And it uses a couple of other configuration files plus the PJ-SIP file, so you don't have that redundant data. It works really well, but the only drawback there is it's for Digium phones only. And not all Digium phones. The Asterisk phones from Digium do not do DPMA. And there's a sample of the DPMA configuration. The config file is res Digium phones, and you'll have a type phone, which will, somewhere up above that you've defined a network. And then You say what line, which references the line down here at the bottom. And then it has to match up with the AOR record, which in turn will pull over the authentication for that phone as well. So this would, from this information right here, you would be able to provision a Digium phone, and it would be able to go out and pull that configuration and store it on the phone. It's kind of hard to visualize without really sitting down and playing with it, but it works really well. Okay, any questions on that section?